I want to thank, I'm actually really excited about the opportunity that MIDAS has provided to work on this project in particular, which is something I've been wanting to do for quite some time, but also for the opportunity, the encouragement, almost requirement, that we work with people from all over campus. So you can sort of see from my list of collaborators that we're working with all sorts of different schools and colleges, and that's actually one of the thrills for me. So I'm way up on the northeast side of campus, and coming down, interacting with lots and lots of different people and perspectives has been one of the big benefits from my point of view, and one of the great, sort of goals of MIDAS. So to sort of set the stage for why we're doing what we're doing, I want to sort of give you a little bit of background and flavor for how data systems are in transportation world right now. And by data systems, I mean, you can think both in operational terms. Most of the data that we work with come from states, actually. There are also national data sets, but most of them come from states and studies that are run in localized areas and so on. So data systems, both operational and research, university data systems, are kind of look like this. So I'm going to show you for crash data. This is where I got my start in transportation data. So, on a good day, in a good state, we've got vehicle identification linked up to registration. So we know who owns the vehicle and how many of them and makes and models. And when we've got crashes, they occur at a location in a point in time. And so you can actually link that location to qualities of the roadway. And again, in a really stellar state, they'll actually know things like how many lanes does the road have and what are the signs there. And so you can actually get some kind of, through this linkage, background information on where this happened, what were the conditions there. In the superstar states, there will be some mechanism for linkage to injury outcome. This is actually fairly unusual and typically done through probabilistic linkage, but it's a real goal currently and also a separate area that we're working in. Then we've got driver's license that'll link you up to licensing and how many tickets you have. So that's actually, that looks pretty good the way that I've sort of laid it out. But the fact of the matter is that this is really pretty limited in terms of the way things can be linked up. Citation and licensing should be linked. And most importantly, and actually if I had really set this up properly, I would slap 20 more data sets on this. We've got event data recorder, which is black box in cars, not linked basically to anything. And fairly hard to get at. But a key element of these data systems is that travel data, which are incredibly important for understanding where people go, how they get there, where they want to be able to go, and driving data are not really part of this ecosystem. So we at UMTRI have a lot of data sets, and actually nationally have a lot of data sets like this, but these are not integrated together in the way that modern data sets, data systems ought to be. And so just a sort of so typically, again, both in operations and research, these data systems are not integrated particularly well. They're not parallel distributed, just basic big data computing systems. And most analysis that we use to drive decision-making in transportation is based on small data extracts, even out of big data sets. So our project is attempting to kind of turn that around the other way. So what we want to do is we want to build a transportation data ecosystem out of the large amounts of data that we have here, and particularly at UMTRI and supported by the Mobility Transformation Center as well. We want this system both to serve as kind of a model of an integrated data system at the state or even national level for both research and operations goals. And I'm a researcher, so that's how I think most of the time. But the operations questions are effectively research questions as well. Where are crashes occurring in our state? How do we need to, what infrastructure should we build? Should we put a roundabout there? Would it be better? These are the kinds of operations decisions that get made around safety. We also want to, we get a whole lot of requests for data and inquiries about data. We'd like to make this a lasting resource for the U of M research community. And one of my diabolical goals is to have all sorts of people who do fantastic sort of method stuff be putting their mental efforts into the transportation problem, because I consider it to be big enough to cover, well, everybody, but I'm sure there's room for some other questions too. But I'd like to kind of engage a much larger community in getting interested in doing transportation research. Having data available helps with that. So here's how we sort of see our Maize and Blue project in terms of its sort of structure. And I'm going to take the pieces one at a time. So first off, you obviously can't really have a good big data ecosystem without a good computing platform. So this is a big focus for us and for my colleagues in computer science who are working with me on this. It will have kind of the expected qualities, parallel distributed, access controlled. But there are also areas where we can kind of push boundaries of the science of system architecture and so on, particularly around supporting high-speed video processing. Also, energy efficiency in data centers is actually a really big deal. And then being able to move data around so that the data that you really want to be able to get at are on the sort of faster, typically more expensive storage. So we're playing around with these optimization models at the same time as designing and building this computing platform and data system. The data, obviously, are crucial, and we are fortunate at U of M to have access to quite a lot of transportation data. So we start, historically, my group, the data group at UMTRI historically was just all about crash data, and to some degree that's kind of all there was, right? We couldn't measure what cars were doing and how people were driving because the equipment and the studies weren't run. This is now, decades ago, but so we have a huge archive of state crash data sets, and we collect new ones kind of continuously. And so that's a real asset. We also have data sets of event data recorder data. So those are pretty cool, and they're actually part of a national data set, so they're publicly available, but we sort of put them in a more analyzable form. And so these are from real crashes, the black box. What happened? There's sort of a 5-second sample of speed and braking, and in some cases lateral kinematics. There's actually an acceleration pulse. The crash pulse is there. There's a lot of information about people who were wearing their belts. So it also is an underused resource. Driving data is the big data here. So driving data comes from a couple of studies. The IVBSS stands for the Integrated Vehicle-Based Safety System Study. Safety Pilot is probably the one that you've heard about. It's an ongoing and actually increasing study of connected vehicles. So there were originally 3,000 vehicles running around. At the end of the original funding, there's a little bit of, some of the vehicles dropped out, and now we're ramping up again. So there's continuously incoming data on where are people going, what messages are being sent from the vehicle, how do people drive, and some of those vehicles actually are also equipped with video. So this is where the sort of emphasis on video analysis is critical. We have also roadway data, GIS, so it's location-based information. You can also think about weather data as location-based information. This stuff is all pretty easily available because it doesn't have any personally identified, the roads don't care if you know all about them. And then travel surveys. Travel surveys are really important. The cool thing is that 2016, the new National Household Travel Survey is wrapping up, and during the course of our project, we'll have access to the data from the brand new National Survey on Travel, which has sampling in all 50 states, and therefore provides us with this essential information of a survey nature, and I'll get to that topic because you've been hearing a lot about it today, on where people go, how they get there, public transportation, vehicle transportation, how far, who are they, all that sort of thing. So all together, we've got, we have over 30 terabytes of driving and safety data. And as I mentioned, we've got the 2,500 vehicles that are out there, and they're ramping up to around 5,500 or so in the next couple of years. The data are coming through. Some of the data are in near real time. So when a vehicle sends a message to the infrastructure, that runs through sort of a backhaul and is available in short time frames. Data coming off of vehicles are still a bit old school in this study, where the vehicle's got to come back and you switch out the SD card and so on. But that loads up in the data set. The types of data are quite varied, and there's actually one of the interesting resources that I also think is kind of underused are the crash narratives. Police officers write little blurbs about what happened, and all the kind of text mining analysis that people do, I think, has the potential to increase the information that we know about these events. And then finally, data quality, data integration to outside sources, and a big issue for us, representativeness, the whole veracity problem with big data. These are also major hurdles. So we're trying to kind of cover the ground there with our ecosystem. So in addition to, so we've got the compute platform, and we're working in kind of all of these different areas. So a big issue, particularly with travel data, and Pascal's going to talk a lot more. His project's really cool around this stuff. Privacy is a big deal when you're providing people with your travel everywhere you go from your home, which is readily, you can find all sorts of information about people's homes and owners and so on, to your work. And so those data are actually fairly hard to get a hold of because they're big issues. But just keeping them from being used in research context is not a particularly good way to make use of data. So we're looking at we're working to develop metrics that on the one hand, so we've got kind of two problems. On the one hand, you can mask geospatial data, but then you reduce its utility for some research questions. So the question is, can we measure re-identification risk? And can we also measure analytical utility and try to kind of find the sweet spot for any given question? For some questions, you really do have to kind of go to all the way to the super secret enclave and make sure people have signed away their firstborn to make sure that, and their cell phone for sure, so that you don't sort of risk identity. But on the other hand, for some questions, you really can aggregate or mask, and that will be fine. This one, representativeness, is one that is particularly near and dear to my heart. And I was really glad to see it, effectively this question talked about quite a bit this morning. It was great. So here's this world of big data. It's super cool. Data are pouring in, and I believe the statistic was like 99% of the data volume is coming from these uncontrolled or unplanned sources, and 1% from survey sources. And yet the problem is, and for transportation, I would argue that this is possibly, maybe healthcare is another area where it's as bad as it gets. The people who provide us with data, who have the means to provide us with data through their cell phones, through their vehicles, are the people who our analyses will represent. And so if we don't pay attention to the fact that there are a bunch of other people who are not participating in the data gathering process, we will not serve their needs in decision making. And so figuring out how to combine sample survey data, which the National Household Travel Survey, again, will provide this really great resource as our project goes on, with the crowdsourced data that we get, even in our local samples, it will kind of help to improve that representation problem. And we think about it two ways. We think about it both in terms of developing weights. So first we look at who's missing, who don't we have in our data set, and we can kind of develop weights for the people that we do have, and that's this whole exchangeability sort of idea. We can also think about it in terms of, well, if we're going to design an efficient survey, how do we want to do that? We know a lot about people with smartphones who drive, but we might need to focus our survey on the groups of people that we know a lot less about. So this one I feel is very important. And then you embed, particularly with weights, you embed that in the data system. So the ecosystem has available in it a set of weights for our folks that, at least in theory, those analyses should have greater representativeness. And then finally, a good computing platform has to serve user needs. So we have included a few sort of key applications in this project that push the boundaries of the computing platform. We like to use the phrase that one of my colleagues, Jason Mars, likes to say is we co-develop across the layers. So we've got a couple of sort of sample use cases that are particularly, we're trying to sort of really push the edges of the video processing. We want that to be able to be done as fast as possible and with the best kind of accuracy. So can we identify stop signs on the fly? Can we identify pedestrians? We kind of move, is it a red light? Is it a green light? And we can actually add that as you kind of run through the data set, you can add that as context in the numeric data. We've got personalized route choice modeling, which if you want that to work as an actual application has to be also done in real time. So the sort of evaluating routes and that kind of thing. And the idea is that, you know, with personalized route choice modeling, you can even sort of ask the question, hey, you know, it seems like you're interested in the country route today. Well, I'll take you, you know, on your favorite, you know, through the woods drive, or today it seems like you're late for a meeting. Perhaps you'd like to go the super fast way. So those kinds of things, you know, based on people's prior behavior. And then finally, there's sort of feature detection, which has applications all across transportation. Features can be anything you want to sort of think of, but some of the specific ones that we're looking for are trying to find kinematic features that indicate that the driver is actually distracted in some way. It's something of a holy grail to be able to identify driver distraction as it's happening, and then have maybe automated systems do something about it. We're also interested in what is abnormal driving as a feature of driving, so that in some abnormal driving could be not concerning, but much of it would probably be concerning. So just as a sort of summary of our project, which is kind of 6 months in, we're moving forward. We sort of see this as this sort of integrated data ecosystem as a model, again, both a model and a resource. We will optimize the computing platform, and then we have a particular focus on protecting PII and geospatial data while maximizing analytical utility, and then also addressing representation with respect to, in comparison to survey samples. And that is the story.
And health overall. So essentially the question is, you know, why is mobility an issue for so many people across the US? And I'm going to isolate 3 issues. One is what is called